This evening's presentation is going to take us on a virtual tour of some of the finest remaining examples of one-room schoolhouses in Southwest Missouri. Our host this evening is David Burton. He is a county engagement specialist with the Greene County MU Extension Office and also the author of 3 books on historic one-room schoolhouses.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I'm speaking to you from inside Liberty School District here, virtually Liberty School. But it's exciting to have this opportunity. And again, I'll be happy to answer questions as we go this evening. And let me get my PowerPoint up here and we'll get going on our virtual tour. Now, this is going to be a tour of really the finest examples in Southwest Missouri. And we do have it laid out in a convenient way if you should want to take off one day and do a driving tour of all of these. And again, my name is David Burton. I'm the County Engagement Specialist with University of Missouri Extension. That is my contact information. I'll leave that up a little bit if you want to, let's see, we do have, if you want to write anything down so you can get in contact with me. But now I do already have one question asking how many schoolhouses are remaining in the area. That's a good question to begin with. In Greene County, there are 72 one-room schoolhouses remaining in one form or another. Many times schools were converted into homes. They were converted into barns and storage when the school stopped meeting. And there's a few that are still in recognizable condition. But all those different types of building structures left, there's 72 of them. I actually have a book on Greene County that kind of details all of those. And these are 2 of the books that are available. If you want to ever avail yourself of these, they are available on Amazon. You do have to look specifically for the book titles, search for them, or search for my name with the middle initial L. And this will address one of the other questions asked in chat about why did I research one-room schools. I was appointed to the Greene County Historic Sites Board in 1996. And they had talked for a number of years about looking to see if there were some one-room schools in the county that were in good enough condition to be listed on the Historic Sites Register. At that time, I didn't have any children, and so I had a little extra time on my hand. And I thought, how many schools could there be in the county left, right? Like that. So I said, sure, I'll research that. Well, it turned out there were a lot, as I mentioned, still standing, and several in really good condition. And just as I was collecting this information, it led to interviews of people that had been teachers or had attended one-room schools. And I was just compiling all this data in a box, and it felt like a waste. And so I did compile that all into a book that focuses really on the buildings in Greene County. And I had heard my grandfather's stories about going to a one-room school, and that was really what had piqued my interest on the subject. So the first book on Greene County, that was published in 2000 and then updated in 2011. And then the Directory of One-Room Schools Across Missouri was published in 2017. And that one really focuses on the very best examples across the state, ones that have been restored and that are maintained well. So it's not just an index of every one-room school that's ever existed. Now, because of the book that I had written on Greene County, over the years, I've been able to sort of mentor and help other people that have written books about the schools in their county. I know there's a book for Jasper County, there's one for Barton County, Stone County, Berry County, Lawrence County. Several counties in the area had people that were interested in the subject and end up compiling books about their one-room schools as well. I think that answers some of the questions that have come up already. Now, I mentioned that information that I was compiling, and I'll just share this, and then we'll get ready to go on our virtual road trip. These are some of the sort of the big umbrella macro types of lessons, I think, that can be learned from one-room schools, at least in the research that I was doing. I had an opportunity to present on this one time at a national conference about sort of the key lessons learned. And I think in these schools, we see the importance of community. Communities came together and built the schools, supplied the schools, provided housing for a teacher. They got together to support it with pie suppers and events. Community was key to the school being successful. There was also an expectation of helping others. You hear that in the interviews that you do with former students, where they talk about when they were an older student, they had to help teach the younger students. So they learned the subject better by teaching it, and then the younger students benefited from the experience of the older students. But this whole idea of helping others was expected. Also, hard work is required. I heard that type of story over and over from former students. I heard stories of tough love, of spankings, yes, other types of punishments, yes, but really high expectations for behavior during the classroom experience. And if not, there was punishment. And most of the interviewees that I've had, I would always say things like, if I got in trouble at school, I'd really get in trouble at home. So there was an expectation of behavior, but also tough love. Ability, not age, is key. Time and time again, I would hear stories of students who said, well, I skipped second grade. The teacher thought I was good enough in math. I jumped over that class that year. That would seem to be a common thing. And also this sort of hearing younger students hearing the lessons of the older students while they were, working on their material, I think aided in that and moving some students along quicker. The importance of literacy, especially in Missouri. If you look at our state founding documents, this idea of being literate was the key purpose behind these one-room schools. I think you'll find that it was a mission that was accomplished. It did help spread literacy across the rural portions of Missouri, and that was so important. And then finally, I think stable and caring families were key to the success of children, even a century ago. We see that in examples. I heard that in interviews about the important role of moms and dads and involved parents in their school's education. Those who have success today, I think that's still the case for them, but it was certainly the case a century ago. Key lessons. So let's get ready to embark on our virtual road trip. A few rules here. You do have to pack your own snacks and drinks, and we will try to take a break about every 30 minutes here so you can stretch. And I'm the driver, so I get to pick the music, but you can set the temperature on your own since you're in your own space. On this road trip, please, no rude noises, but feel free to ask a question at any time, and I'll try to answer it. And I will specifically during those breaks take a look at the chats and the Q&As and try and cover those questions. So let's get going. We're going to begin our tour, and again, this virtual tour follows the publication that's going to be made available to you with the addresses for your own driving tour. We're going to begin at Liberty School, which is located inside Nathaniel Greene Park. Now, Liberty School is kind of a half recreation, half moved school. The actual Liberty School was built in 1890. And over the course of about 10 years, several former students and teachers organized themselves and worked with the park board to move the school building to Nathaniel Greene Park. And in the course of moving it, they found there were more structural problems than they realized and more rot than they realized. So a lot of it had to be reconstructed, but they were able to use the original plans and design for the building. And it's a wonderful place to visit. You can't, if it's not a special event or something there at Gray Campbell, there are nice windows where you can look inside. But if if you get over there during a special event, it's great to look around the inside of it. It is fully furnished. It is stocked with books. It is a great example. Here's the interior of Liberty School, and you can see the different size school desk that accommodate the different grade levels, the different size of students. And there were some Liberty students that were still living when this was reconstructed. They had input on what the school looked like and what things were up on the wall, such as the picture of Washington and Lincoln. Some of you may know Norma Tolbert. Norma was the driving force, her and Vera Chandler, behind raising the monies, and she's getting this accomplished. She's holding a picture up of the original Liberty School. Now, Liberty School had ceased to function as an active school building in 1951 when Liberty consolidated with the Fairgrove School District. And so the building had sat empty. It was used as a home for a while, but it had, deteriorated quite a bit by sitting alone. And then again, as mentioned, there was a lot of problem with rot on the building. And so portions of it had to be replaced when it was moved. It stood out near Liberty Baptist Church out near Fellows Lake, if you're familiar with that area. And again, it was consolidated with the Fairgrove School District. That is Liberty School. Well, we'll mosey on down the road here in Springfield. We're not going to leave the city limits yet because we have to stop by what's called the 1905 school. This is on the campus of Missouri State University. This is a reconstruction. Jim Baker there took an interest in having a one-room school on campus because Missouri State was founded as a normal school. Teacher education was a big part of what they did, and they wanted to highlight that on campus in some way. And there were some schools that they looked at about moving them to campus, and they just weren't real feasible in doing so. So they did a reconstruction using the Missouri State blueprints that were available from 1905. There was sort of a building boom of one-room schools in the Missouri during 1905. And this is because of the state law for mandatory attendance that was passed in 1904. And so there was an increased attendance starting in 1905. Oh, I do have one comment, and I will share and be sure to mention this later as well. Liberty School that we just looked at is actually open on Saturdays and Sundays from 1:30 to 4:30, May through October. And again, that's located in Nathaniel Greene Park. So if you have an interest, I certainly recommend you go by and see Liberty School on Saturdays and Sundays, 1:30 to 4:30. Thank you for sharing that information. So the 1905 school stands right next to Greenwood Laboratory School. It was built using the plans that were available from the state of Missouri at that time. So it was, like the model school. They have furnished it with desks and other things that have been donated over the years from former Missouri State teachers. They do have some special events there sometimes. I think it's sometimes used for meeting space for the kids at Greenwood as well. But a great example. Well, since we're continuing this virtual tour and we're going to be heading out of North Springfield anyway, we're going to stop by Willey School, which is north of Willard. Now, I'm not using Willey here as an example of one of the best kept schools. I'm showing Willey as an example of a school that has had several different efforts over the years to restore and refurbish it. People often ask about grants to do restorations, and really, there aren't any grants to do that unless your school is just really historically significant. It has to be unique in some way, connected to an important person of history. Then there would be some dollars, but not if the building is still owned by an individual. It would need to be owned by a board or a nonprofit. But there's been a lot of interest in this one because of its visible location. But there's also a couple other interesting stories to tell with Willey. This building was built in 1894. It is still standing. And over the course of the years, this is a black and white backside photo. One things that schools always were reviewed on each year was by the county health department. They would inspect their outhouses, and they would inspect the lighting inside the school. And one of the things they kept track of was what side of the room the light was coming in from. Every student at this time was taught to write with the right hand. And so the light needed to be coming in from the left side of the students. The feeling at the time was if they were left-handed and the sun was coming in, it would cast a shadow on their paper and it would cause an injury to their eyes. So everyone was taught to write with the right hand, and every school building made sure that the majority of their light was coming in from the left side of their students. Well, Willey was built in 1894, and over the years, the former owner told me that they changed the inside structure of the school, the layout, and when they did, they would cover up existing windows and they cut out some new windows so the light would shine in properly on students. It seems like a lot of work to go to just to do a little remodel on the inside. But we can't see the north side of Willey here, but they have windows on all three sides as a result of these movings of windows. I mentioned outhouses were also inspected, and Ed Staley told me that in the 1930s, when he was a student there, the outhouses were graded as poor and the school board had to replace them. So they replaced them with concrete outhouses. This was supposed to be a state-of-the-art design at the time for sanitation. He said at the start of the school year, they had a ribbon cutting for the outhouses even, that everybody was really proud of them. And everything went really well till cold weather set in. And he said one day a student raised his hand. It was snowy outside, saying he needed to go to the bathroom. He left and he didn't come back. And eventually they went to look for him. And it was so cold he had stuck to the seat, stuck to the concrete outhouse. And first they had to peel him off, and then they had to make some modifications to their concrete outhouse. So since we're in the Willard area, we're going to pay a visit to Flint Hill School. Flint Hill is still standing. There's a club that meets there occasionally. And it has been a home at one time, but now it's more fully restored on the inside to look like a one-room school. This particular structure was built in 1902, and there's nothing too remarkable about it, except in 1917, this is a great story that I was told by C. Willow Zimmerman. I don't know if any of you know C. Willow Zimmerman. She was interviewed frequently for different historical articles and things in the Willard area. And she remembered that in 1917, Flint Hill was blown on its side by a tornado. It didn't lift it, it sort of tilted it off its foundation. It didn't destroy it, it left it intact, but it dropped it to its side. And she said that, quote, it was quite a job to set the schoolhouse upright again, but the neighbors realized how important it was to save our school building. So the neighbors got together with the help of the Craig boys and their house jacks. They piled cordwood high on the west side of the house and started jacks to raise the house. As the house went up, the wood helped to hold the house in place until it finally fell back onto its foundation. And thus they had saved Flint Hill School. This is, sometimes they went to great lengths to manage new things at the school without making major renovations, I guess. You had a great structure up here, and you could see there were very small windows on that east side, big windows here on the west side. And in 1923, the school teacher apparently had a car and she wanted to park it in out of the weather. And the school board approved. Here on the left corner, you can still see the door They dug out a portion underneath the schoolhouse. There's a ramp there where she could drive her car underneath the school and park it. There's a little door there, and to keep her car in out of the weather. So they were pretty ingenious there at Flint Hill. It's a couple of different unique changes to that building. A question here about where the names of schools come from. This person asked, is it location? Is it owners? Is there a pattern? That is a great question. There's not really a pattern, I would say. You see all of those examples. It's common for the school to be named after the family that donated the land or the materials, like in the case of Willey School that we just looked at. The Willey brothers owned a lumber mill in Willard, and they provided the lumber for the school, and they named it after them. So, and sometimes it's the family that gave land. This is a frequent occurrence. Sometimes in the case of Flint Hill here and others, it's named after natural characteristics in the area. Maybe the area was already known by that name before the school was built. Now, Flint Hill's an example too, is that there was originally a school predating Flint Hill that was down the hill about half mile to maybe to a mile, and it was called Nebo. And Nebo burned, which was a common demise of one-room schools. Missouri statistics put it at almost 75% of one-room schools burned down at one point in their life and one point of their use. And so when Nebo burned, they changed the location. Nebo was probably in an area that flooded some. It's a lot closer to a river. And they moved it up the hill, and this area commonly known as Flint Hill because of some natural characteristics there, and then renamed the school Flint Hill. I'll try and, when I can recall that, I'll mention a few more as we go here, but it's all of those types of examples. So Schuyler School is our next stop. This is located near Fantastic Caverns. It is in really nice condition and is still used on a regular basis. If you live in that area, you know the Schuyler Community Center is active and they have monthly lunches, except I don't think they did during COVID. They have a big annual pie supper and an auction there to raise money to keep the Schuyler building going. Schuyler was originally a one-room school. And then in 1905, when mandatory attendance became the law, they had to add a second room onto Schuyler. That's what you see here in this present design. So the original one was built in 1904. I'm not sure that I recall when the second one was added on. And then, let's see, attendance dropped in 1941. Of course, you had the World War beginning at that time, and you had consolidation with the Willard School District in 1952. 1952 and 53 were big years for consolidation in Greene County. Now, there are several schools in the Willard district specifically that consolidated much earlier than that. But Willard was really a leader in the state for having bus transportation. And that caused some of their consolidations to happen much earlier. This is one of the schools. Schuyler and Flint Hill previously are both on the county registry for historic places. Now, Bellevue School actually sits behind Pleasant View Middle School. You know where Pleasant View is located. This building is important because it's reflective of the progressive ideals or principles of rural school design and sort of the New Deal social philosophy. If you're familiar with that in history, they came out with what they said was a model school design at that time. And as far as I could tell in my research, Bellevue was really the only one built at that time using those sort of model principles that were laid out. It does not stand on No, it does stand on its original site. It had a coal bin underneath the school, and it was, let's see, it was consolidated in 1954. It was actually constructed as a WPA, Works Progress Administration project in 1939, and then it was consolidated in 1954. So it did not have a real long tenure, but we share that one because it was unique in its structure to the area. And you can see this is the other side of it. It's it doesn't have many windows for sure, but it is a solid brick construction. It's used as storage presently by the Springfield School District. Well, we'll continue on down the road. We'll head east now out to Strafford, Missouri, really kind of northeast. This is North Star School. North Star is not staying on its original location. It was moved to this location inside the city limits of Strafford. It was moved in 1952, just shortly after it was consolidated into the Strafford district. It was for years the meeting place for the Women's Progressive Farming Association. And we do have it on the County Historic Register. Now, you can see on the right side the characteristic small windows. And then another shot of that. And then on the other side, whoops, I didn't include it. I'm sorry, I double put in the wrong picture there. Anyway, on the west side has just almost the whole wall is covered in windows. So that's a very, again, characteristic and something they tried to pay close attention to because of county health rules. Sorry about that, miss. We'll go on here to Fairgrove. Oh, a question about who maintains the historic sites. Yeah, I think last time I was at North Star, it had been painted. There had been a little restoration project I think they were in the middle of, and then it paused. There is a group in Strafford, let's see, the Strafford Historical and Preservation Society. They maintain North Star School, have a bit of a museum in there, and they have done some restoration work to it. I think people are often surprised by what it ends up costing to do some of the work on these buildings, to paint them correctly, or even to replace windows or things. It runs into a lot of money. And many times they're on a small budget just to try and keep electricity on and use them in some way. So it can be a real challenge to do some of the preservation. We have some other examples here later on of some efforts that have been undertaken to really do great preservation. But that was owned by the Historic Society. Many of these are still individually owned. First year of North Star School. I do not recall off the top of my head. I'm looking for my other literature here. I would have to look that up, and I'll look that up on one of our breaks here. I'll grab my book. We'll cover a few more, and we will have been on for 30 minutes, and we'll take just about a 5-minute break. I'll tackle that question. Here is Locust Prairie School. This is in Fairgrove. This is such a nice, picturesque place. It sits atop a hill. Now, it was Locust Prairie School was founded in 1853. The first teacher there was paid $22.78 for the entire year. And then, but she must have done a good job because the next year she had a pay raise all the way to $49. So either she did a great job or she had twice as many students. Now, Locust Prairie, like many of the other schools, ended up burning down in the 1890s. And the structure that is standing here was rebuilt in 1893. It is still maintained and used kind of as a community center in that area. They used to have some monthly music gatherings and do some activities there at Locust, Prairie. They do regular fundraisers to help maintain the roof and the inside of the school. It's, let's see here, still has the original desk. And somebody asked earlier about the maintenance of these schools. A lot of these pictures I'm using are 10 years old. So while they could have been improved since then, and some may be worse too. Let's head on to Webster County, and then we will take a break here. This is Greenwood School. You take I-44, and then you take the Northview exit, and you can find Greenwood School in Webster County. This, like so many others, was built around that same time. It was built in 1908. It replaced a former school just down the road. Residents in that area took out a $300 loan to be able to build Greenwood School. There is still a Greenwood Community Club that helps maintain the building. They meet there on a regular basis. They have get-togethers and other things throughout the warm days to maintain it. There's a different angle of it. The outhouses are still standing at Greenwood, and the interior still lovely and set up like a school district with their seats and everything. Answer some of the questions that have been asked here. Yeah, the researching of schoolhouses is just a personal interest, and I had the time. Yeah, and I'll try and mention the schools. North Star, I do not know the origin of that name. Again, it's been almost 25 years, I guess, since I worked on the book originally. So some of this may have faded from my memory. I just flipped through the book real quick. I have it indexed by school district and with pictures and then a little information about each of the schools. And lo and behold, on North Star, it does not give the construction date. I did not include that, but I know that I've seen that because we did write a historic registry document for that school building for the county, and I know we included it in there, but I don't accurately recall it off the top of my head. I would fathom a guess. My guess would be that it would be after 1905 based on its design. I might put that more at like the 1908 range or 1910. There were booms at both of those times, but I've certainly been wrong before. That's not a 1905 design. And I don't think it's as old as Locust Prairie for some architectural reasons. And I'm sorry that is not included in that book. Yeah, all these buildings are just maintained by different people. Somehow they have an owner. They may not invest much in keeping up the exterior. Some questions about desegregation, local one-room schools for Black children. These were often referred to as Black schools. I think we would probably call them the African American schools now. And there were a few around Greene County, not as many as maybe you might think. And I'm sorting here through my index. There's none that are restored and in good condition. Most of the time, and not just here in Greene County, but across the nation, the hand-me-down schools were used as the African American schools. So you had a school that had kind of outlived its usefulness, perhaps, or was too small, and a new school was built down the hill somewhere for the white students. If there was a large African American population there, then they would get to use the other school. And for that reason, they were in poorer condition and have not survived over time. There are a few exceptions around the state. There's a nice one in Park Hills up near Kansas City. Of course, OTC, Lincoln Hall at OTC was originally the African-American school for the city of Springfield, the high school that exists. Cave Springs School, which is near the Cave Springs Church, it's not included on this tour because it's a house now. It's private property. It's a home, and it looks very much like a home. You would not know it was a school unless you were specifically looking and knocking on doors to find out, which is what I did a lot of. It was a school for white students, and then when Cave Springs consolidated with Willard, it became the African American school. So, it's technically still standing, but it is a house. And then there was one that I did discover that was still standing in Ash Grove, being used as a storage shed behind a home on Prairie Lane. But that school was purchased by Father Moses Berry. Some of you may know him. He had African American History Museum there. They disassembled it and moved it to his farm with the goal or the plan to put it back together. And that just never has happened yet. And that's been, that wood's been sitting there for quite a while now, maybe 15 years or more. So in this area, not any really good examples to show of that. I'm sorry. Now, about North Star, someone said they had just Googled and it says 1881. And I will say that this is always a point of contention with groups that are proud of their history and in school districts. 1881 may be when the school district itself was started, but that does not mean that that building was built in 1881. Because again, many of them burned down. This was a common problem with coal stoves and lanterns and other things of that nature. And so, like Locust Prairie School I talked about earlier, the people that maintain that, they always love to talk about our school was established in 1853. And that's true, it was. But that building was not built in 1853 because Locust Prairie burned down. And that one that's standing was built in 1894. So, or 1893. So there is a difference. And I would simply have to look at our materials that we did for the nomination. A question about Gravel Point School and Mountain Grove and Kabul, that they're not on this Southwest Missouri tour. And how were the districts numbered? So most counties had a county school superintendent that did reviews of the teachers and oversaw, worked with the school district boards, the school boards. Many county archives, you can find the county superintendent district scorecards where they would go around and rate the school building for how it's maintained. They would also do the ratings on the school teachers, which are sometimes interesting to read. And so they played a big role in doing that. The enumeration of school districts came in around the turn of the century, different in different counties. It was not uniform across Missouri at that time. And so they kind of applied these numbers really based on, kind of geography, and the county superintendent assigned those numbers. And so you'd see a collection of numbers here in this area, like in the Republic area, they'd be sort of sequential around the city of Republic, and then you'd move over to Rogersville and they'd be sequential over there. And then if the area grew and another school got added, then that school just got assigned the next number on the list. So while you do have some that are sequential based on region, you have others that seem out of sequence because they got built at a later time. But that was up to a county superintendent to do that. All these schools were, of course, operated by a local school board that hired their teachers, and they were pretty fiercely independent. Oh, in chat, let's see. We know of 2 African-American schools that are still standing and in decent shape. One is in Mount Vernon, across from the middle school. I have never heard that. I'll need to go pay that one a visit. And one in Greenfield, across from the current elementary school, that is used as the music room for the elementary. Well, that is interesting. I'll need to track those down. I know the one in Ash Grove was used after it stopped being the African American school. It was used by the school district for a while for a meeting space before it was moved and used as storage. So these both seem like likely scenarios and very interesting. I'll have to check those out. I think the story here is that they are maybe fewer and further between. There were fewer of them, and they were often of less quality or had already, fallen into disrepair. All right, so we'll get back in the car. Hopefully, everybody's had a break on our road tour, and we'll begin here at Rocky Point near Marshfield. Now, one of the other things I should have mentioned on this virtual tour that we tried to accomplish was we included, of course, we wanted a map that flowed easily, was easy to get to, but also maps that were easily either accessible from the road and are sort of on public property and could be accessible. We didn't list ones that were private homes or that are setting behind a private home because we didn't want people on private property trying to get a look at them. And there are some in the area that are nice, but they're setting behind the home. And yes, and in the discussion, we will be talking about that one in Neosho for the African American school. Yes. I guess I was thinking specifically of Greene County when I was asked that question, but we will talk about that one. So Rocky Point is in Marshfield, and it was used up until 1962, actually, before it was consolidated. So it had a nice long run as a school district, and it did consolidate into Marshfield. And the interior, probably not the original school desk, of course, but chalkboards are still in place, and it's of that same interesting design. Now, Crescent School is at Buffalo. They have a historical park there in Buffalo where they have a log cabin and some other historical buildings. I sometimes call these historical petting zoos, where you can go in and actually go into the buildings. One of the interesting choices they made on Crescent, when they moved it there to the park, they decided to make it 3/4 size. So they left 1/4 of it off. I don't know if this was a cost issue or what, but so it's not full size. It is maintained on the inside, has desk, and they keep their Dallas County Research Library inside Crescent School. So it is opened occasionally when you get up there. Actually, I think my notes say they decided to cut it down so it would fit into the park that they already had in place. And that is in Dallas County. And of course, it has 2 doors. That's a common question that I get, and it's something you do see in a lot of the earlier buildings because they did double as churches, and certainly some denominations had women on one side of the church aisle and men on the other side. And so most typically that is the case when you see a school with 2 doors. It was not something that was required by Missouri, and it was not something that was included in the model architectural drawings for model schools. So that's something that would have been added locally by a board if they knew it was also going to be used as a church. Now we'll venture here into Bolivar. Now, obviously, this isn't a one-room school. This North Ward School was built in 1903, and it now houses the Polk County Historical Society. It was actually the high school for Bolivar from 1903 to 1917. But on the inside, one of their rooms is set up like a one-room school in their museum. You can see books and desks and materials. And they also have pictures lining the wall of different one-room school classes from across Polk County. It's a real interesting display, a nice thing to see. And that's why I included it there. Well, Coleman School, obviously it's not one of the better maintained schools, but I include it here because this is really kind of why I got interested in one-room schools to begin with. This is the school that my grandfather attended, the one that he had to walk 2 miles uphill both ways in snowstorms to get to. That's an exaggeration, and I'm not sure that he ever told me that, but he did have great stories about things that happened on their walks to and from school, he and his brothers. Now, this was in 2010. I think someone has since kind of cleared the trees and cleared some of the brush out from around Coleman School, but it has seen better days. It's rotted on the inside. And you really have to go back in time. You know, the first picture was 2010. This is year 2000. You can see it's already going to have water damage and other problems. And if you go back further, though, to 1948, you can see it in its glory days. That beautiful big bay of windows on the left side. It was a stucco construction, Coleman School. And that area there was called Coleman Corner as well. Beautiful structure. Now, if you go back even more, you're going to start seeing some big classes. That teacher would have had her hands full with this group inside Coleman School. And then we go back even further. Then 1924, my grandfather's on the back row, standing just to the left of the teacher, who is the most left female in the picture. My grandfather's standing there, along with most of his brothers here in the picture, I think, at least his younger brother. And then back even further, 1917, here's Coleman. And you can see at this time, there's some smaller windows on both sides. The east side is showing. And my grandfather's one of the ones holding the chalkboard that lists the date that they're at school there. And of course, a bit of a curiosity there. They have a male school teacher at that time in 1917. And you can see everybody's dressed up in their finest, I would guess. Maybe the first day of school for pictures. They've got a lot of jackets on, but a much smaller class at that time. But that's really why I was interested in one-room schools, because I had heard some of his stories. And my grandfather, Orlis Farmer, was a great storyteller, and he had some great ones to tell. So Coleman is actually on the driving tour because you go right by it. But then this is en route to Lawrence County, where you can go to Littlemore School. This school is also moved from its original location, not much, maybe a quarter mile. Virginia Snyder, some of you may know Virginia, moved this to the Snyder Music Park out there. And it is really nice on the inside and really well maintained. Let's see, how long did teachers stay in one school? Then they move school to school? That's a great question. I guess the general answer would be there's all sorts of tenures. There are some interesting list of rules for one-room school teachers. In 1897, I have that list of rules in my book, and it lists things like if you're a male teacher and you go to a barber shop, they will question your thrift and work ethic, because, who would go to a barber shop to waste their money on a haircut? Is sort of the thinking there. It gave the men teachers permission to date during the week if they attended church on Sunday. There were also teacher contracts that, didn't allow the women to date, or if they got married, or as in the case of one room school that I was told about by a student, where the teacher got pregnant and they were no longer the teacher. And that was usually the case if they got married too. So they were often young. Now, not all one room school teachers got married. So some of them had longer tenures because of that. And some taught one room school and worked on their education, like at Missouri State. And then when they had a degree, moved to the city, to a bigger school district. You have all types of examples. And again, the local school district did the hiring. So depending on how well they got along with the school district and maybe which students they got in trouble or punished, that might have made a difference on their tenure as well. So it's all across the board. Now, Littlemore School was actually built in 1900. The name, there was originally close in that area, about a mile, a school called Moore School, named after a family. And it burned. They didn't have as many students. They rebuilt the school down the road, but at a smaller size. So it became known as Littlemore School because it was smaller. It's still standing, and when there's events there at the park, which may not happen very much anymore, you can see the interior. Now, this is a great example of renovation and a great example of interested people working together. This is in 2013. This is Phelps School, Miller, Missouri. It is right along Route 66. And a group of interested individuals contacted me there at the very beginning about their interest in renovating this school. And you can see it's got a hole in the roof, and it was rough. It needed a lot of work. But it also had some grant potential because of its location, being along Route 66. And we were able to get some grants to help them. These were not huge grants. I think the biggest one was $3,000. And then we got some smaller $1,000 grants. But they also really rallied the community in that area. People put in sweat equity. The local hardware store, provided some lumber. Different businesses chipped in money. Then when they had the flooring, for example, some of the people put in their sweat equity installing the floors and getting this back up to standard. That current schoolhouse right there was built in 1889, and they did work, and they have restored it. It is open now, usually on the weekends, but they do have special events there. And it was used as a school until 1952 when it consolidated with Miller. But they have done a great job of restoring it, and in the process sort of putting in like energy efficient windows and things of that nature, but really maintaining the historical integrity. They went back through archives and looked for pictures for the bell tower, and it's been a great group effort, and there's been a lot of people involved in restoring this school. People are asking about other building features that were in common, and you're right, a lot of these do start looking alike, and it's because they may be based on the same architectural plans. There was local school district wasn't required to use them, but the state at different times came out with what they called model plans for schools. That happened in 1904, and you see a lot of those 1904, 1905 schools using that plan. The windows, because of the health department and others that inspected buildings, that often caused the architecture to have some similar features. But there is some variety around as well. It just depends on the plans that they used, and sometimes the building materials, because there are some others that are not just white clapboard schoolhouses. Although the idea of a red schoolhouse is not a Midwestern thing. Red schoolhouses were Northeast United States, not in the Midwest. Let's move on here. But Phelps School is a great example. St. Elmo is one that several groups have tried to restore over the years, and it still needs some work. There's a 4-H club that meets there. You can see the small louvered windows on one side. It is stuccoed, and then these big bay windows on the other side. The interior is really large. It's really kind of set up almost like 2 separate classrooms inside St. Elmo. And this school district was started in 1885. The land was donated at that time, and there's some discussion about when the actual building was built, and then maybe if it was built and added onto. I think we finally settled when we wrote the historic nomination for this. We said 1895 to 1895 on the construction because there were not clear records to pinpoint an exact date. And I think I probably fall in the camp of thinking there were probably 2 constructions here for St. Elmo. So again, we went from a wood structured school to a stucco and now to a fieldstone building. Now you may be familiar with enough local history to know that this design really pinpoints this as a WPA project. This is a WPA type of stonework that had a particular name for that type of stonework, using local sandstone. Sycamore School is used as a community center. You can rent it out for get-togethers and birthday parties and reunions. They do an annual pie supper and auction to raise money to keep the building open and available. And it's the outside architecture is most distinguishable because of the stonework. And there are larger windows on the side, on the back side there. Well, after we've stopped at Sycamore, we're going to get on the road and put on some mileage here as we head to Monett and Kings Prairie School. It is owned by the Kings Prairie Community Association, and so it has an ongoing use, and so it's in a little better shape. The original building was built in 1876, and it had a lot of modifications and a new floor and things in 1889, but it is certainly one of the older examples in the area. Some of their enrollment numbers at Kings Prairie, I don't know, some of these older records, sometimes you got to scratch your head a little bit because it shows enrollment as high as 90 students at this at Kings Prairie School. I don't hardly see how you would pull that off, although I did hear from some students that, you know, the boys might show up at the start of the year and stay for a month, and then if there was field work to do, they would disappear and you might not see them again until the end of the school year. So that could be a factor in some of this as well. This was later consolidated into the Monett School District. And then if you've ever had a chance to be at Jolly Mill in Pierce City, also a historical petting zoo, I guess, because there's other things there in the park. Chapman School is sitting there. It was originally known as Hazel Mill School District. It was enumerated as Berry County School number 1, but it was commonly known in the area as Chapman School. And that is in Jolly Mill. You can go inside that when the buildings are open, and they are open sometimes on the weekends. Chapman School is actually on the National Register of Historic Places. The folks that have organized and maintained Jolly Mill Park years ago really put in a lot of effort to get that on the National Register. It is a wonderful design, and it used to be well maintained. I assume it still is. It was built in 1884. Then down the road and a little hidden is Old Dry Valley, named after kind of the area there, where it's what's known as around the river. Of course, this looks a lot like the other ones that we've been seeing. This is individually owned. They own it and maintain it, but they do allow people to use it for community events and things. That's an indoor shot of Old Valley School. Then we'll move on to Cave Springs in Jasper County. It is now owned by the county park board. They maintain that. That happened in 2016, I believe. They took the facility on as a parks facility. This also is on the State Historic Register. It has a lot of history wrapped around it in this area. There was really a whole community there at one time, and then during the Civil War, when the courthouse in Carthage was burned, this was used as the replacement for the courthouse during the Civil War. And there was a small Civil War skirmish there on the property. There is a memorial to some of the soldiers that were killed there at the time during the Civil War. It's a really a nice example, kind of off the beaten track, a nice historical spot and school. You can see it's for that time period, this was a really nice, well-built school building. Solid brick, dual entrances, the well right there on the porch, which we see sometimes. And so it was also a Union militia headquarters, fully restored in 2007. Used for 128 years. And you can see the interior, well maintained. It's great to see some examples like that. And if you're into little road trips, that's certainly one worth stopping by to see. Now, since we're driving westward anyway, we'll stop by Newport School in Lamar. It's still used as a voting site, and the little community club takes care of it. It was originally a one-room, became a two-room school. And you can see the inside of it's pretty substantial, larger than many of the other ones. The original school was built in 1874. Pardon me, but it was remodeled and added on to after the turn of the century. Schuyler School is in Liberal, Missouri. And I know it's always open during their Prairie Days Festival. They originally opened their school there in 1869. This school does not date to that period. It is more in the 1890s for this structure. It's situated close to the school there in Liberal. And although it is well maintained by interested individuals and the city, it's not open very often for visits except during the festival. The Schuyler Schoolhouse Preservation Society raises funds to take care of their building there. Now, some of you may have visited Red Oak before. This is over near Carthage area. The owner is Lowell Davis. There's a lot of historical buildings there at Red Oak, and he moved Elmira School there. It celebrated its 100th anniversary, let's see, back in 2017. So about 1917 construction. But the whole Red Oak area is really interested to visit, and a great road trip in itself if you've not been to Red Oak. Elmira School. And bright yellow paint on the inside. Lowell Davis, they restored it the way he remembered it, so I'll take his word for it. But that seems to be a pretty bright color for the inside of the school. And you notice the desks are situated facing the exit doors, which the light's coming in from their left side, but that would seem to be a challenging way to set the room up. Now there is also a Little Country School in Seneca. That is the official name of that. And again, I did not research that county with the intensity that I did Greene County, of course. So I'm taking their word for it. It does hold a historical display for schools and for Seneca itself. There's a caboose that's located next to the school there in a park area kind of behind the post office in Seneca, Missouri. And there is a restoration group that maintains the Little Country School. There's the shot with the caboose, which is set really close to it, but a great example. Now, we did talk earlier about African-American schools, and I had forgot about this when we were talking at the time. This one is still being remodeled, or it's probably nearly done now. It's officially part of the George Washington Carver National Park, because this is the school that George Washington Carver attended for a while. They discovered that maybe 10 years ago that it was still standing. It was a home. And so individuals have gotten involved, in the Carver Birthplace Association purchased the property. They worked through the federal government to do a restoration of the building. The National Park Service has been involved. They named it the 1872 Colored School, 1872 being the year of its construction and founding. And that was more of what it looked like when it was originally purchased. It was being used as a school. I think I've got a drawing. That's the artist rendering of what it's going to look like when it's completely restored. And I think it should be close to that point now, with some interpretive stations out front telling the story of African-American education at the time, and of course, George Washington Carver. And to see, this is a great example. Grants were available, national money is available to help with this restoration because it's connected to a famous individual of history. Then in Neosho, we have the Newton County School, and it's it was originally known as Cedar Creek School. It's maintained by the Newton County Historical Society. It's in an area there where they have a museum, and they have a former sheriff's home and a jail and a pre-Civil War log cabin. The Newton County Historical Complex is what it's called, and this school district sits there. It's certainly worth a visit. It's well maintained, and their official records show that it was built in 1896. This is New Bethel School in McDonald County. New Bethel, really closer to Pineville, I believe. And you can see that's just fieldstone from the area that they used. Really, one lady came to a program that I did maybe 20 years ago, where we got together people that were interested in a one-room school restorations. And she came to learn what she could, and was really interested in seeing New Bethel come back to life. It looks even better than this picture. It is really fully restored. They replaced the windows in it. They replaced the floors. They have done garage sales and fundraisers of all types to get the money. They put in sweat equity, and they're using it as a community center in the area. So they've brought new life back to the old historical New Bethel School there in McDonald County. And it is certainly distinctive in its design. And then Bunker Hill School in Pineville, it's still used as a quilters club and a community center as well. It was built in 1929, consolidated in 1948. And they have monthly music events in there still. And these things, really help the schools that are the best maintained are those that still have an ongoing function, right? An ongoing use. And then it also kind of helps raise a little money to maintain the building as well. Picture's kind of blurry there. Sorry about that. This school has been moved to this location. It's moved next to the Barry County History Museum. They have a really nice history museum there in Cassville. Black was the last name of the family that this was named after, moved and restored. This is just a recent, well, what seems to me is recent. I think it was around 2009, 2010 that it was moved there and restored. But it's open for visits, and they have, pictures of Barry County School District kids and Barry County Museum in there, history, school desk, and nice addition there to the Barry County Museum. Well, you may not know that there's also a historic one-room school at Silver Dollar City. This was always a have-to-go-to stop when my kids were younger. It was moved there. It is an 1870s construction, and they've, of course, restored it nicely on the inside. And they can tell you where there in Stone County this building was moved from. Yeah, I think it was moved from an area that was going to be flooded by Table Rock Lake. This kind of sets back behind what's called the Homestead there at Silver Dollar City, back behind those buildings close to the petting zoo. And then really maybe one of the finest examples on this whole tour is Starr School at College of the Ozarks. This is actually a school from Barry County, so it was moved to College of the Ozarks. It sits immediately north of the Ralph Foster Museum, and so you can tour it as part of your admission to the Ralph Foster Museum. It is the school district itself was founded in 1863. The school building originally this one was built in 1899, and then it was moved in 1975. It was given as a gift to the Ralph Foster Museum, and it is lovely. The inside is immaculate, beautifully restored. They do field trips for students in the area that come there, experience what it was like to go to a one-room school for an afternoon, but it is really well maintained and worth the stop. And as you're coming out of Branson, you can stop by Boston School in the north. It's used as a community center or a senior adults gathering place. And then Willey Creek, another one of those schools with the field stone construction. This is in the Cape Fair area. And lots of individuals were involved in really restoring this school probably 10 years ago. They had meetings there on a regular basis. They had for a while a bluegrass festival on the property there that raised money for the renovation. This is called giraffe stone when it's put together in this way. And it was originally a wood school building, but then it was covered in rock in the late 1940s. It had this giraffe stone added to it. It's a solid built school building, and it was transferred over to the community in 1953 when the district consolidated. The original building itself was 1901. That's after the renovation, and they, redone the sign and everything. Really a good looking school. And then Bruner School in Sparta, Missouri. The current building was constructed in 1910, and it is considered a multi-room school, at least 2 rooms. There was a one-room school that stood there previously, but in 1910, they did the 2 rooms, and it operated until 1951. There is it gets funding from the Christian County Seniors Fund. There's a senior center that meets there. They do fish fries and events. The Bruner Community Association maintains Bruner School. Well, that would bring us back to Springfield, Missouri. and the end of our virtual tour. I'll look and I don't think there's any more chat
I didn't
questions.
see any more, but if anyone has questions, pop them in the chat real quick. David, that was so great. I hope you guys can hear me. I needed to leaf blow at 8 o'clock at night. So can you hear me okay, David?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Thank you, baby. And my son just gave me a flower. So some of the joys of working from home, right?
Right.
Okay.
Here's one more question I hadn't got to, and a comment. Did you know that there's an old school building for sale in Golden, Missouri? It's available from the Cassville School District. So there you go. You can buy one and move it to your property if you want to. Interesting. Lots of times when these school districts consolidated, the school sold the buildings, and that's how they end up being moved and turned into homes and barns and storage facilities, because they were solid built buildings, and it's a shame to just let them set and rot down. So people put them to use.
I see Jody's question in the chat that they came in late. Yes, we will be posting the entire presentation to the library's YouTube channel within the next few days. And tomorrow, I mentioned sending out a PDF of addresses of all the schoolhouses. That will also include a link to the library's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go watch the entire presentation within the next couple of days.
There's a couple of questions here. What was a surprising find in your research? So much of my research was done what we call BK, that's before kids. And so some of that's been a while now, and I've forgotten it, but I just heard so many interesting stories from students, and a lot of commonality in that, I guess. I guess I was surprised when I got to digging around how many of the buildings were still standing, even though some were just used as storage. I mean, let's just give you a moment of complete honesty. I was on the Historic Sites Board, and I agreed to take on that project and research the one-room schools in the county, because honestly, I was sitting there thinking, how many buildings could that be? I was really, I mean, I knew the school my grandfather went to was still standing, but in my head, I was really thinking, what am I going to do? Research 3 or 4 of these? So that's just the honest truth. I guess that's the biggest surprise, that there were that many still around in one shape or another.
Someone also asked in the chat, I don't know if you saw it, which school ranks what are your top 3 favorites?
Oh, wow. Like for all of Missouri, or boy, I'm going to have to dig back. There is a well, here locally, I'd say Locust, Prairie, because it's just such a picturesque setting. It seems like what you would imagine a Ozarks one-room school would look like. I think it's a beautiful one. Star School at Point Lookout, College of the Ozarks, is really well maintained. And then I guess I'd probably say Liberty School, since it's real close to us here and it's open on the weekends. And I know the effort that went into restoring it. It's such a nice thing to have in our area. I would say that. There are some great ones around the state. Mount Gilead up north is fully restored and a beautiful building. And then I'm drawing a blank now. There's a state park where there's also a mill and a fabric, what used to be a fabric works. I'd have to look it up. It's a state park, though, and they have the one-room school there is an octagon, and it's brick, and it was built way prior to the turn of the century. But it is a really unique, probably the most unique one in Missouri.
David, did you see the question from Charles that popped up in the Q&A?
I have not. Let's see here. Oh, yes. Debbie in chat has a better memory than me. She says Watkins Mill. Yes, that's where it is. I don't remember the name of the school off the top of my head now. I'm not much help, am I? But I know it's in my Missouri directory, but it's really a unique one. Oh, old school have a piano or pump organ. That's an interesting question because apparently a lot of them did. We probably been 10 years ago or so, I worked with the State Historical Society, and we had people who were former students and former teachers come in and record oral histories. And those are available. Many of them are online now from the Missouri Historical Society, and you can hear their stories about being in a one-room school. And many of them mentioned having music during the day. And sometimes not all of them, but some of them did have pianos, and sometimes they got lucky and had a teacher that could play the piano. So I guess it probably depended on space and local school board budget. I remember Willey School, that was the beginning of the tour, they had a piano there, and Ed Staley talked about the teacher playing the piano for them and them singing. So that did happen some for their music education. Interesting. You know, these schools, a couple of the things that really led to the demise of one-room schools were improved road system. As the roads got paved or improved, that opened the door for busing and made it much more economical and easier to do that. And then the rural students or parents started looking at the city schools saying, well, we want that for our kids. We want them to have access to the things that are going on there. And the school bus system made that possible. And lots of times these consolidation votes that were taken were really about letting go of the local flavor and giving your students access to the things that the city kids had through busing. But lots of times the consolidation did really change that area, that local community. When the school stopped functioning as the hub, they didn't really have anything to take its place. And that is kind of a sad side to it.
David, I want to say thank you again. This was, I just love things like this, and you're such a great presenter. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And y'all, thank you for attending. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you soon. Have a good night.